reshoring of supply chains a reality? Dan Veroni is the founder of Potomac Core and author of the book Reimagining Industry Growth, Partnership Strategies in an Era of Uncertainty. Hi, Dan.
Hello, Bob. How are you?
Good. Thank you very much for being with me today. So this is a topic on everyone's minds these days, and there's a lot of controversy and disagreement about it. So I'd like to hear your view. How feasible indeed is the goal of manufacturing reshoring back to North America generally, the United States specifically? What extent can this be accomplished?
So I think it's a great question, but I think it's a question minus a strategy. And what I mean by that is that to a very large degree, our supply chain strategy is company focused instead of industry focused. And because it's industry focused, we've become siloed. Those silos have prevented us from seeing the greater or greatest opportunities. We've had supply chain difficulties pre-pandemic. And rather than saying we want to reshore or nearshore, what I would propose that we do is take a more long-term strategic view of this and determine the best answer by industry. So, for example, one of the things we might want to look at is industries have supply chains. Those supply chains are ecosystems. That those ecosystems and supply chains build strategic partnerships with their industry trade associations. They utilize those relationships, Bob, as neutral ground, and they identify the pre-competitive challenges that they're able to address and determine what the best pathway forward is for their supply chains.
Interesting that phrase you just used, pre-competitive challenges, because the first thing that popped into my head when you talked about doing it as an industry is, of course, the industry consists of a number of companies who compete against each other. Right. What are pre-competitive challenges that they all have in common, and how can they work together and yet still retain this competitive spirit?
So let's talk about the elephant in this room. So when we talk about reshoring supply chains, it's something that there's a good bit of energy for. But here's the challenge. We've got 12 million people 12 million positions that are currently not filled. Mm-hmm. In order to reshore supply chains, what are the things that we need? We need trained, skilled workers. So when you look at, for instance, the Reshoring Institute, and they talk about reshoring supply chains, one of the more common themes is, well, you've got to have trained, skilled workers, you've got to have access to transportation, right? And you clearly like government incentives, but there's a missing piece there. The missing piece is that what if there aren't trained, skilled workers? How can that industry ecosystem come together in a pre-competitive way and say, what are the common skills, traits, and characteristics that we need in our workers? Are there areas of the country in the United States that we'd like to be located? And then if there are, then as an ecosystem, through the strategic partnership with an industry trade association, how can we create then a public-private partnership with education systems, whether they be two-year colleges, whether they be high schools, elementary schools, that say, we're looking to build an ongoing pipeline of workers. It's that kind of thing. So when I hear that we've got a solution, the answer is we have ideas of solutions, but what we really need is ideas of broader, more strategic strategies that we can agree on a competitive basis to address the long-term challenges and build those long-term opportunities on a pre-competitive basis.
I noticed that you're not saying that the answer to reshoring in a time of labor shortage is simply automation and robotics. You're taking still a very human-centric view of the situation. Is that indeed the necessity that we have to be considering?
So let's look at it this way. Automation for most companies, for most manufacturers, is something front of mind, top of mind nowadays. It's a reality. It's coming our way. But at the same time, you still need trained, skilled people to operate those machines, Bob. Make no mistake about it. These are jobs that will likely pay well, and they will be career-long jobs that will be very satisfying in whatever communities they're based in.
Don't you also need to be considering the whole infrastructure of suppliers and sub-suppliers and the multiple tiers that have to be proximate to your manufacturing operation? You can't just bring a factory back without bringing along the suppliers that feed it. Is that also something that can be done in a non-competitive partnership kind of spirit, or is that a company by company situation?
Great question. The answer is pre-competitive spirit. If you're building your relationship with your industry trade association, it's imperative that not only the supply chain, but the entire value chain be at the table. If your value chain's at the table, Bob, here's the answer. The answer is you're going to have your suppliers at the table as well. They're going to tell you what can be done, what can't be done in terms of proximity. Again, it's critically important to bring everybody to the table on a pre-competitive basis to identify things like trained skilled workers and where we can and cannot site.
Just changing the location of a factory is in itself a very complex and time-consuming process. What you are proposing to me now sounds like it's even more long-term. You're talking about developing expertise and education within communities, bringing suppliers over. This sounds like something that is at least maybe years ahead of becoming a reality. Is indeed that the case, or are there some short-term plays as well?
So I think what we have to do is recognize that this isn't a problem that gets a Band-Aid. This is a problem that requires new and different thinking. What we're looking for is transformation. So, interestingly enough, for those of us who are of a certain age, we know that in 1961, President Kennedy said, "I want us to get to the moon, send men to the moon, return them back safely to Earth in a 10-year window." Mm-hmm. Let me say that again, in a 10-year window.
By the end of the decade, he said, we're going to put a man on the moon.
By the end of this decade. And it was July of 1969 that happened.
Yeah.
But here's what mattered. What mattered is that President Kennedy made the declaration. Bob, we're at a point in time that we all need to put our heads up and to make a new declaration and make this our next moonshot. We don't want to be in this place 10 years, 15 years, 20 years from now. We want to transform. We want this to be our next moonshot. It's going to take time, but we need to make the declaration. In other words, we are going to do this.
You are positing a very strong role of trade associations in your vision of the future. Are the trade associations as they currently exist ready to step up and able to step up to this challenge?
A perfect question. In my book, I talk a lot about that. I talk about 5 industries in particular that are already and have already stepped up to the challenge. Interestingly enough, one of those industries is unmanned systems. Talk about how they're stepping up to the challenge and anticipating the future. I also talk about other industries that include frozen food, baking, recreational boating. They've all built these strategic partnerships throughout their value chains, and they are ready to move to the next step. In a number of cases, these trade associations are helping these industries think through the worker challenges, literally creating online programming to get workers trained and recruited. No doubt in my mind, it's happening already in trade associations. These are likely strategic partnerships that can play a considerable role in building that new, different, and transformative future.
Let me mention the book again, Reimagining Industry Growth, Partnership Strategies in an Era of Uncertainty. Dan Baroni, the author of that book, thank you very much for bringing to this conversation the nuance and the vision that is required to really make reshoring a reality. Thank you very much for being with me today.
Thank you, Bob.